Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our event focused on security, privacy, and risk in the world of Gen AI. My name is Lauren, and I'm the content manager for the Google Cloud community. And I'm thrilled to be here with our security leaders, John and Anirudh, who will be taking you through the content today and answering your questions. Before diving in, I want to remind everyone that questions are encouraged, so please feel free to add those into the YouTube chat box, and we'll be sure to get to them either in the chat or at the end of the presentation. We also had a few pre-submitted questions that we received, so we'll be covering those as well. And for any questions that we don't get to, we encourage you to create a post or search in the Google Cloud community, and the link to that is in the YouTube description, along with a few other resources that we'll be covering throughout the session today. All right, so I know we have a lot to cover today, and I'm excited to dive into the content that we'll be covering. So with that, I'll hand it over to the team, but don't be shy. We're in the chat. Ask your questions, share what you're working on, and we'd love to hear from you. And with that, I'll hand it over to the team.
Thanks, Lauren. Hi, my name is Anirudh Kannan. I am a cloud security architect at Google Cloud. I've been an architect, a security architect for 10 years, 2 of those at Google, and I've been helping customers of all sizes in all industries build secure, resilient, and very compliant clouds. And I'm excited to talk to you today. And we have John, our star from the cloud security team. John, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Anirudh. Hey, everyone. John Herring. I'm a cloud security manager within Google Cloud Consulting Professional Services. Been at Google coming up on 4 years now, and just been helping our largest enterprise customers secure their cloud environments.
Awesome. Well, so why are we here today, and why are we talking about this specific topic? Well, Gen AI has definitely taken the world by storm, and the number of conversations that John and I have had over the past few months around Gen AI and security has grown exponentially. And I'm sure for the folks tuning in, these topics are of great interest. So that's why I would like to start by thanking you for giving us the opportunity to share some of these learnings that we've had from these customer conversations. And while we will talk about Google products, this will not be a product pitch, but rather it's our attempt at a genuine conversation on security and Gen AI. So, a conversation on security could go so many different ways. So where should we spend our next 60 minutes? Well, a couple of months ago, John and I hosted a Gen AI security roundtable in Cambridge for our customers. And we asked the attending customers, so think CEOs, CTOs, folks from legal, product managers, security analysts, what have you, what the top security challenges were on their mind when they thought about Gen AI in general. And we created a word cloud based on those answers. And we think you might have questions about these same topics. And that's what we're going to do today. Tackle strategies that will solve for these problems and give you not only our expert opinions, but also resources like white papers and architectures that will help you get further. So, but before we get started, we need to start by level setting. And let's start level setting with this quote from, I've heard this from both Sundar Pichai, our CEO of Google Alphabet, and also Thomas Kurian, our CEO of Google Cloud. More than 70% of unicorns are using Google Cloud for Gen AI. So John, what is your reaction to such a bold statement?
Yeah, great question. I'm not surprised, right? I think we all know Google has been invested and involved with AI for years, right? You, of course, have DeepMind, right? But even, more recently, when we talk about Gen AI and LLMs, 2017, right? The attention is all you need that really kicked things off there, right? Not at all surprising to me. And I think that customers seek out Google for those capabilities. And I don't think it's just around the AI, right? I think that is obviously a powerful capabilities that we offer, but it's also around the enterprise readiness, right, of the cloud platform itself for our customers. And of course, we're here today talking security, the security aspects of that cloud readiness. So you're right, bold statement, but not too surprising to me.
And I couldn't agree more. I mean, in fact, when I see that Google is frequently being called out as the leader in both the AI space and the security space in analyst reports, I don't think it's a coincidence that security is a differentiator for us. But John, one of the things that I think our audience might be thinking about right now is, their first foray into Gen AI is either Bard or Imagine. So what is the portfolio of products that enterprises should be thinking about when it comes to Gen AI?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. That's why I do like this slide here, because you're right. Differentiating between that enterprise set portfolio of products and the consumer set is really important to understand. I think a lot of us are probably, when we think that consumer side, familiar with like Bard, right? Chatbot, you talk to it, really useful. I use it in my personal life. I'm sure most folks here have tested it out at least once. And you can see, right? Like, hey, I'm planning a trip to Patagonia. Help me out with this. Very useful for that purpose. But then when you turn to the enterprise setting, right, and our customers, you start to get more or different questions, right? And you start to think, well, what are you doing with my data? How are you protecting it? How can I protect it? How do I interact? And that's where we shift more to the enterprise suite. And that's where you see Vertex AI, Duet AI. We'll get into these in a bit more details in a few, but that's one of the big distinctions there, right? Think of the terms, right? Consumer side, what's it geared towards, use cases there versus enterprise, the terms there. And like I talked about, kind of that enterprise readiness with not just Gen AI, but all the foundational aspects to it.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I think to summarize it is basically think about Bard for consumers, Vertex for enterprises. But within the enterprise or rather the Vertex portfolio, what tools are there in the suite in general, John?
Yeah, when you look at the suite of tools we've got there, I really like to think of the personas, right? So if you look at the right side of this slide, start at the bottom right there, the AI practitioners, right? So think of your data scientists, right? What do they need, right? So what are they using? Think your Jupyter notebooks, right? Maybe they need to use that, train some models. They want to set up some ML ops pipelines using our model garden, right? So they're trying to create those models, get insights from the data in their environments, and provide value to their business and ultimately customers, of course. So, those are a couple of the products they might be more geared towards using. As you move up that persona stack there, you've got the developers, right? So developers might be supporting the practitioners by creating applications that make use of those models. Maybe they're making use of our products directly, talking to our APIs, right? You see their search, conversation, doc AI, they might be interacting and leveraging those directly for their application and uses. Continuing up, you've got your business users, or you can also think like end customers, like leveraging what was built, what was done by the previous two. Even here, it's not listed, I think, almost like a level above Duet, right? If you're a workspace user and think you're in Docs or Sheets and you're leveraging some of the Gen AI capabilities that we make available through those products, right? They're really kind of consuming and using Gen AI was made available by the others. And when you look at this suite, right, you see at the bottom there, you've got the Google Cloud infrastructure. So that is supporting all this, right? And as you might imagine, security is obviously in there and certainly applicable up and down the stack here for all of those different use cases that we have. Anirudh, maybe you want to just talk in a bit more detail, maybe on a couple of those products I mentioned.
Yeah, perfect. And I think basically the way I think about this is the lower you're in the stack, more platform as a service, infrastructure as a service. And as you move up, you get to those managed services. Mm-hmm. And the one thing I always like to highlight in this is Model Garden, which is basically like a marketplace, right? To solve a Gen AI problem, you need to use the right kind of LLM to solve it. And Model Garden is basically a marketplace for you to take, not just Palm 2, but also third-party open source ones like Claude and Llama. So really helps you pick the right kind of LLM for your use case. So it's good that we're talking about these tools and services, because I think the one thing we need to do before we actually head into kind of talking about strategies around security that help people succeed is understanding how these tools come together in an architecture. So let's start there. I mean, this is a busy slide, but it's a very powerful slide. And we probably want to break it down into pieces and talk through each individual section. But John, where would you start? How would you tackle this?
Yeah, great question. And agreed. It can be a bit busy, but let's break it down. Funny enough, I'd start on the right side, right? So if we look there, this is our Google Cloud, that common infrastructure, right? That's shared across. I won't go into it here, and I definitely encourage, if you're interested in, hey, how is that protected and what controls do you have, to take a look at some of our white papers there. Today, obviously, we're looking at Gen AI focused. So when thinking about Gen AI, what is that common infrastructure? That's that LLM, that large language model that is frozen and hosted on Google Cloud and made available to customers and to products, right, for use. And when you think about that LLM, right, well, what's it doing here? It's taking that input, it's processing it, and it's generating an output and sending it back out. What is it not doing, right? It's not storing that data or any parameters, and it's certainly not using any of that data to train or improve a model, right? I talked earlier between the consumer and the enterprise side of things and those terms, right? Key part here, right? So think of, again, that common infrastructure. Where's that LLM frozen and hosted? And so if we continue moving through our diagram here, this next part should hopefully, I won't say look familiar, but be familiar to you, right? This is your Google Cloud project, right? Let's keep it simple, one project here. This is the one that you, your customer, your enterprise would deploy and use GCP resources within it, right? So great examples here being, you could see storage, BigQuery, hopefully very familiar to you. Now we're layering in new products and new services, right? The AI, ML stuff, Model Garden, Gen AI, you could see conversation and search there, right? These are just new products we're making available in the project that you can start to access. So when you think about that, the same security controls, right? I talked about that platform, enterprise readiness, and security with it. Those security controls still come into play, right? They haven't gone away. So when if you look at the top there, I'll say an orange and yellow little locks at the top, you'll see all the way in the top left, right? We know Google Cloud encryption at rest is on by default, can't turn it off. But maybe you have needs beyond that, right? So you might look into customer managed encryption keys, right? CMAC. Or perhaps you have data residency requirements, right, that come into play, and you can only deploy in certain regions, certain countries, and host your data there, right? Still very much applicable. Moving along, right, logging, such a key part of any security solution, right? Looking and monitoring those logs, collecting them, access transparency, right? Still at play here. Finally, I'll say last but certainly not least, VPC service controls, a super powerful, really important control to protect your data. So think storage, BigQuery, right? Hopefully you're using VPCSC to protect those services. That's still, again, continue to protect those, those services, that data, as you move into the Gen AI world, right? So hopefully, again, that makes a lot of sense, still applicable. As you move on now, you can see we've layered in at the bottom there the Google Managed Tenant project. So if you're familiar with our services, think GKE, Cloud SQL, you know that we actually create a project that is Google managed, Google hosted, right, to support those services, right? Gen AI, no different. We do that for Gen AI. You can see here now we're getting into the adaptive layers to support when you start to bring in, your data and start tuning your models and things like that, right? So again, it can look complicated, but hopefully it's starting to make sense, right? You've got the common infrastructure, your project, a Google managed tenant project, right? And how they start to interact. And really, again, I'll just keep, I'll say it now, I'll be the broken record through this. You'll hear me say a theme throughout this is how much doesn't change. We definitely will be talking about what changes, but there's still so much that's very much applicable. So as we continue on, right, and all the way to the left side, now we're talking about maybe you're creating an application, chatbot, or you've got an API and you want to interact and talk to Google Cloud to get some of these capabilities from our Gen AI products. You can certainly connect in and still do that here as you would with our other products. And same with the top left there, right? If you are on-prem or have another cloud provider that you want to connect in and take advantage of these capabilities, you absolutely can, right? Just as you would with our other products and services. So yeah, Anirudh, like you said, bit busy. Hopefully it makes sense. And perhaps Anirudh, I'll kick it to you. I know these are just a couple of the security products, but I know there's obviously others that we don't even have listed here that are still certainly applicable.
Yeah, definitely. And the key takeaway that I always take away from this slide is you can have Gen AI all in Google Cloud native, but you can also do a multi-cloud approach. The platform supports all of it. And the hardware that you see on the right is physically incapable of actually storing your data and training off of it. So really that question that we get all the time, do you use the customer data to train off of it? Yeah, we don't. And that's where it's shown architecturally. And a couple of things I actually like to highlight. One of the questions we always get is, how do I know if Google is accessing my, some of the infrastructure that's supporting my projects or my data? And access transparency logs, or AXT, the little arrow there on the top, or the little lock there on the top right, that is our way of helping you understand when Google resources are actually touching your infrastructure. It could be for something like maintenance or for like support. And it also gives you the ability to kind of say, hey, I don't actually want you to touch this project. I don't want to give you access to it. So it gives you control. So that's a very unique thing that people often forget about. And the other one is VPCSC, which I think is a unique offering that Google Cloud has and is a really unique way of approaching security. API level firewall is how I like to think about it. It gives you the ability to prevent services from interacting at an API level, and also an ability for users, to kind of like whitelist or blacklist users depending on, context aware, identity aware kind of ways, So VPCSC and access transparency logs are definitely some of the more underrated but very powerful security controls that come with it. And the two that, I can think of top of my head that's not mentioned here are IAM. So there are roles, custom roles that you can make within the Google Cloud Platform to kind of control how people interact and what they can or cannot do with your Gen AI project. And there's also org policies, proactive measures for you to ensure that certain security controls and standards are always implemented in any project or any folder that you create within the Google Cloud tenant. So, we've been talking about, architectures and level setting for the past 18 minutes or so. So I think we need to get to the meat, and that is towards the strategies. So even before we get to strategy 1, let's go to strategy 0. And the strategy 0 is you need to have a strategy. Often, right? Often the first conversation we have with our customers on Gen AI seems to be, hey, my company wants us to be able to say we use Gen AI on our products. How do we do that? And how do we secure it? Or XYZ department in my company is building Gen AI. How do I solve all the Gen AI security threats, right? The pace at which Gen AI moves is insane. And getting to market first with that use case is definitely the way to get ahead and drive revenue and build your brand. However, if you approach Gen AI without a strategy in mind, it can turn out to be more expensive in the long run and make your innovation unsustainable. So that's why the key to winning is to understand what the mission and the vision of your company are, what are the strategies to accept them, to achieve them, and then tie that into your use case. And everybody in the company needs to have that common definition. So let's try to understand that with an example, right? So your mission is your what? What do you want to achieve? And for example, Google's mission is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. The key thing to take away there is it does not say AI or security, because that is not a what. That is not a what. Right? The strategy is the how, right? The strategy is how do you achieve that mission or your vision? And it could be something like, oh, we'd like to enhance our users' digital experience, right? Again, not yet gone into the specific details. And the specific details and examples of how you achieve that with your software, your product, is your use case. So for example, enhance our users' digital experience. The use case could be use Gen AI to automatically summarize web pages and articles when a user searches for a specific term, right? So that's what is important. And I think, John, you said you had a real life experience on this with one of your customers. If you want to share that with us.
Yeah, happy to. It was 2 months ago now, I guess. A customer called us. They were having some troubles trying to figure out, really wrap their head around really Gen AI and security of it. So they called us in, and we sat down with them, started talking through some of the concerns, what they knew, what they were looking for information on. And we quickly realized that they were really heavily focused on prompt injection, right? They didn't know how to solve this. I think probably at the time too, seeing some headlines, they had some serious and valid concerns, right, around how do we address this. So we then said, all right, let's just take a moment, and hopefully for a lot of you, this is familiar within Google. We do this all the time. We said, what is the critical user journey, right? Just walk us through this use case and that user journey that would lead to this. And they responded, they're like, well, we don't have that, right? We're just trying to set up the foundation so our teams can then start, using Gen AI. That raised a bit of a flag. We're like, all right, well, maybe we should get together with, the AI practitioners, right? Your data scientists, the business, and really just talk through what they're thinking, right? Followed up again. We had a bigger meeting where the other teams presented to security and us about what they were thinking. And they had 3 use cases. The first 2 were for an internal application they had to enhance some of its capabilities. The third one, they were a little less interested in. It was a chatbot for their external facing website. And so we started asking them questions, and, they really, what we said was, it sounds like the third one, you're not as interested. It's really the first 2. And they're like, yeah, we don't have too many issues today. That was just going to be a fun uplift, but we didn't see as big of impact as we do for the first 2 use cases. So we probed them a bit further on the application and how it would use the LLM. And we quickly realized and asked and said, wait, it sounds like the application itself is actually generating the input and the data that's going to go into the LLM, not an end user. And they're like, yeah, no, it's just, it's the application. It's sending the data over. At which point we turned to security and we said, well, it sounds like some of the concerns you raised around prompt injection aren't as applicable, or it's going to be a little different when you look at the application generates it, not an end user can, input whatever they want, right? And they're like, yeah. So we said, well, how about letting them go full, speed ahead with those 2 use cases, knowing you still want to and will address your other concerns for that chatbot. And they're like, yeah, this is great. And they're really happy. But I think it really shows here, I feel like they had that vision of, we want to use Gen AI, right? It's powerful. It's a new tool. We've got to use it, get some value. But they almost like jumped over strategy and went to, all right, we have to solve each use case, right? Here's a use case. Here's one. Here's a chatbot one, right? And they didn't have that kind of middle step of, well, how are we going to define value, right? Where are we going to get it from? How are we going to figure out how to get the value out, right? Essentially, like you said, that how. So that's where, having a strategy is so important, involving, others, right? Really powerful and can help you avoid situations like that where they lost some time because of it. So
yeah, I agree. Money doesn't grow on trees, and I always hear CISOs complain about how they don't have enough budget, right? It's always tight. So, how do you justify a budget, a security budget? How do you do all of that? And having an understanding of what the mission is, what the vision is, what is the strategy the company is trying to achieve from a business perspective, and tying security into that strategy and solving for the use cases that are going to help achieve that strategy. That's the kind of transparency that boards and CEOs appreciate, because it's letting them know that their money is going towards the right kind of initiatives within the company, and that the money is actually helping sort of like enable revenue generating products. So, we've established that you need to have a strategy, right? And the next step is to have risk awareness. And this quote from Stephen Hawking kind of like nails that in, because AI can change the world, but unless we're aware of its risk, it could probably end the world, kind of thing. So, in the world of Gen AI, John, how do you think and why do you think this should be done, and what should people be thinking about in this thing? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, it is a good question, and really why, first strategy here that we've got is governance and risk, right? So when you look at Gen AI and some of the questions that already came in and what we dealt with, like you set up in Cambridge, was around, what is different and what's the same. Here I'll just take a minute to give a shout out to the Google Cloud Office of the CISO. They published a really good paper on, I think it's just securing AI, similar and different, right? And they really detail out, I think, very well when you think of security and AI, what's the same, right? Because there's a lot that is, and then what's different, right? What are the new novel areas that I need to start to think about and consider, right? When you think of the area, when we're looking here at governance and risk, what's the same? Think of the same questions you would ask of any new product, any new application that you're going to use or take advantage of. And you would start to ask, well, how's my data protected? How can I protect it? How do I, for protection, think access controls, encryption. But you might then ask, like, well, what are you, as my provider, doing with this data, right? Those standard questions you normally go through. Same as today, right? Hopefully you've got pretty good control around your data. So you can say what type of data can get into this new capability or not. And you have the ability to say, yeah, this is where my sensitive data is. So I know if it can or cannot get into this new area, new product that we want to take advantage of. So I think those are areas that you should just think about of, what do I normally ask? What do I normally go at and think when it's just a new product? How would I normally approach it? I think for some of the new areas, Anirudh, I don't know if you want to just chat on that.
Yeah. I mean, two of the topics that always come up when we talk about governance and risk. One is obviously, what is the impact of AI regulations that are either in the works or out there, right? So, while AI regulations aren't new, or rather, the AI regulations are new, the approach to it isn't, right? And having that governance strategy in place can help you prepare for upcoming regulations. And take a look at like frameworks like the Google's Secure AI framework. Those can really help you understand how do you implement that governance and what that should look like. And I think Lauren will paste one of the links to the SAFE framework there. And the second question that always comes up when it comes to like risk and governance is the question of ownership and the legal implications of generated AI content, right? Like, if you use Imagine to generate an image, or if you use Vertex AI to generate code or text or whatever, what are your property rights? Like, what do you own? And can you get sued for the fact that the code that was generated, could somebody sue you? And this is where it's important to understand the platform that you're choosing to innovate on. So for example, in Google, if you are creating data on Vertex, right? Google considers all the data that is generated from your Gen AI project on Vertex as customer data. And so therefore, it has no claim of ownership on any of that. And in fact, there is a blog that's going to be shared soon called Legal Indemnification, which basically outlines the fact that if people make copyright claims on Gen AI created content from Vertex AI, then Google will help you and protect you legally. And if somebody, for example, sues your company and says, hey, the training data that you used for generating this content is actually copyrighted or something, that blog explains how that indemnification from Google can actually help protect you. So being aware of some of these is really important as you create this sort of governance and risk around your Vertex AI or Gen AI journey. So John, other than this, what other questions should people be thinking about in terms of governance and risk?
That's a good question. I think, it's like we said before, right? What are the standard questions you ask? So, we've got here regulatory compliance, right? So, what type of data do I want to and am I going to use with Gen AI and these LLMs? And because of that, what sort of compliance requirements or regulatory implications are there for that data? The other is asking questions around what use cases do we want to start with, right? Are we allowing internal only or internal and external, right? What type, right? I talked earlier about a chatbot versus just the application sharing information, right? What are your internal governance standards around that? And probably finally, I mentioned it earlier, I think, but just what do you want from your provider, right? What sort of standards and principles do you want your provider to adhere to? When creating these capabilities and these LLMs, right?
Yeah, for sure. And the one thing that I want people to take away is don't think of governance as red tape and something that stifles the innovation within your company, but rather think of it as something that gives you structure around that innovation so you could be that much more successful faster. And now that we've talked about, okay, one of the important things is to have a governance in place, right? We know about the risks. The question then becomes, what else do we need as part of our preparation to make us ready to be successful? John, what do you think that next thing is?
Having that foundation, and really that's what this is about, is future proofing yourself, right? So when you think of cloud, right, why do customers come to cloud? And it's about innovation, right? It's about taking advantage of those capabilities that cloud has to offer, that scale, right? And so today we're of course talking about Gen AI, but in the future, who knows, quantum? By the way, not an announcement. Please don't get me in trouble. I'm just, the idea being, right, that you don't know. We don't know, right? I think, Anirudh, you said it earlier, Gen AI took the world by storm. And I think the customers that we've seen go the fastest and be the most successful so far of diving into Gen AI, they already had their solid foundation, right? They had that in place, so they were just extending and starting to use new capabilities. So when you think of that foundation of that platform readiness, again, it's a lot of the same stuff as before, right? People, process, technology, right? So when you think about your people, are they skilled up, right? Do they have the skills of this cloud provider that you're using, the tools that you're using to interact and make use of that cloud processes, right? Do you have the right processes defined to leverage it? And when I say processes, think too, I have a customer who they literally define a process that says, if our cloud provider comes out with a new product, or when I should say, right? This is how we will safely and securely start testing it out and allowing our teams to explore it, so that if we like it, if it meets our needs, we shift it into our environment and just start making general use of it, right? And man, they they hit the ground running with Gen AI, because they're like, enact this process, go, right? So
Yeah.
super powerful to have those defined. And then of course the security controls, right? The tooling, if you think about it, right, there's a lot of tooling when you start to set up your environment. All right, how are my users getting provisioned, authenticated? How am I managing the environment? Oh, good, I'm using infrastructure as code. What's my repo? Do I have tools to monitor that? How am I collecting logs, and what's my monitoring and alerting, right? We don't want to just generate noise. We're thinking about monitoring, right? That's the worst. You want to have a good response playbooks, that sort of stuff. And when you already have all that in place, the tooling and the knowledge of that tooling in place, it's much easier to then just extend it to the new capabilities, right? Rather than having to start fresh, start new. So the platform level foundational readiness can be so powerful if you've got that in place, and now you're just extending it out to these new features, new capabilities.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, I always think that having the right kind of platform and can make the difference between how fast your product goes to market. And I think that leads perfectly into the next strategy that we should be talking about, which, while we are Android fans here, this is a good quote from Steve Jobs. Innovation distinguishes between a leader and a follower. So, John, what is our next strategy?
Yes, innovate from the bottom up, include everyone, right? So if you see here, we want to avoid tunnel vision, right? And in this case, right, Gen AI, it's a tool. What's the saying? It's if you've got a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So I've got my Gen AI tool. What's the tunnel vision I'm getting? Perhaps it's every use case is a chatbot, right? And it's hard to break away from that, but you need to, because it's a tool that we are literally still defining all the uses of it, right? We see some amazing innovation out there, and it's still being defined. So don't allow, what others have done or what you've seen to kind of zero you in and confine you into very specific use cases or uses of it. And so how do you avoid that, right? We'll start to invite everyone to partake in identifying use cases, right? Great idea is just get a hackathon going. We did it in professional services. It was really successful. It was really cool to see all the different submissions, right? We have a couple that they're taking forward, right? And it was really exciting because when you get everyone involved, one, I guarantee you'll be surprised at what some of them these amazing people come up with, right? They're very innovative of like, this can help me in my day to day, right? And I know how, because I know my job better than anyone else, right? And once you get them in like that, now you, from a security team perspective, can start to see, right? I talked earlier about different use cases. Maybe you see like, wow, all of our submissions are heavily, 80% are related to this one area, right? Maybe it is a chatbot, right? So you say, well, we probably should solve that, question we have around, prompt injection, because that'll unblock a huge amount of use cases that have large impact, that we value as large impact. And so when you do this, it also invites people to see, oh, we've got a way that we're going to start using these tools. And that's really where that second bullet comes in, of trying to avoid that shadow IT. I think some may have seen the news and headlines where different customers, right, are trying to block those, again, the consumer products, right? Because team members say, hey, I want to use this, my company's not making it available, maybe I'll just go use this other product. And they don't really fully understand the implications of what they're doing, the risks that they're putting themselves, their company at, by using a consumer product, not an enterprise product, right? So when you start to involve everyone, you hopefully shoo that away and say, yeah, we're going to enable and make everyone more efficient by getting to your use cases, your uses, right?
Yeah. And John, I have a customer. It's a large security company, and they had exactly this problem. So what the CISO started noticing was the marketing department in that company. Some of the users had started using ChatGPT to make their workflows a lot easier. And they started copy pasting potentially proprietary data onto ChatGPT and like saying, oh yeah, it makes my life easier. And from a security perspective, this is a data exfiltration risk. Your data could probably go and train your competitors. So this is not safe. So what they did was they had one of these hackathons, and they had that conversation with everybody and said, what are your use cases? What do you need, right? And they came up with these prioritized set of use cases that, as we talked about before, align with their sort of goals and business objectives. And from a security perspective, they now knew what are the new tools that need to be enabled within that company and where they need to spend those security dollars. And the result was amazing. They shopped around, they found a good Gen AI platform. Obviously, it was Google, and they saw amazing results. So I couldn't agree more. Involve everybody in the conversation. It's going to help you in the long run. It's going to prevent those shadow IT problems that we just talked about. Okay, so we have talked about having a strategy. We've talked about having governance, being risk aware, being being platform ready, and then making sure that you have innovation from bottom up. The next step is to get into that nitty gritty of security. And what is that, John?
Threat modeling, good old threat modeling, right? Doesn't go away. Should absolutely hope you all were and are doing this always, right? Gen AI, certainly, no different. Need to do your threat modeling here. And before I get into some of these, I'll just call out, right? Leverage the papers and information that are already out there, right? So think NIST has published some OWASP top 10 MITRE's Atlas, right? Take a look at those, read through, understand, what the industry and what others are saying when you're looking at threats and threat modeling. What I did here, we put it into, I'll say, 3 high-level categories. This is not exhaustive, right? But these are big categories to really think about it and help you as you look at and start doing your threat modeling, right? So if we look at the first category, input, data going into your LLM. First one there, I talked about it a bit, prompt injection, right? So is somebody going to manipulate the input to have the LLM do something that we don't want it to, right? To have that bad outcome. This, not terribly different in the concept of today we've got what WAFs. I'm looking for SQL injection, right? It's that user using an input to try to get it to do something bad. Of course, how we address it and the challenges of prompt injection much different, but the idea is similar, right? Looking at that data coming through. The next, poison data, right? Do I have, or does a bad actor, I should say, have access to that data, and can they do something that would now have adverse effects on your LLM, right? Cause it to give bad data, biased, whatever it is, manipulate the data so that it negatively impacts your model and thus the use of your model. The other one, right? DDoS doesn't go away. You still are trying to make your service available. So if you're hosting it, making it publicly available, definitely make sure you've got plans to address and keep your service up from DDoS attacks, right? Where it might get a little bit more novel, right? And this is, again, I'll give credit to our colleagues in the Office of the CISO in their paper. They talked a bit about, in the past, it was a bit more deterministic. Now we're getting into less deterministic. And when you look at the output, on a route you had earlier on the cloud map, the big one in the middle, hopefully everyone saw, hallucinations was a big one that a lot of our customers were concerned about, right? Just an LLM just making things up, right? So how do you ground that in truth if that's what's required for your use case, right? How do you trace it back to sources and things like that, right? That's going to be a bit new, right? Of coming out of your output, looking at that. The other part of output is, disclosure of sensitive information. This could be via, a prompt injection, trying to get it out, that sensitive information out. Or it could be where you're trying to have LLM serve different purposes, parts of an application, users, where you need to make sure it's not sharing inappropriate information across. That's more novel, right? That is a new area that you need to look at and say, how are we addressing this, right? And it'll change, again, based on those use cases. I go back to my customer earlier who they were worried about prompt injection. Their use case, the application, it properly was allowed to have access to all the data the LLM was going to feed back out, right? So they weren't as concerned of sensitive data being made available to the app because the app was supposed to have all that. The end users had full access to all the data anyway. So that, again, where they went through their threat model, you identify it, but then you can mark like, hey, it's, this is how it's addressed. Everybody already appropriately is allowed to see all this, right? So thinking through these novel threats and working it the way you would any other kind of threat model, right? The final piece here, we'll just call out, again, talking about deterministic or moving away from that. When you think of applications, you know what an application is going to do, or I should say, generally you do. I'm sure we've all had situations where like, how did you do that? But then, you go look at the code and you say, that's how, right? LLMs now, we're getting a bit away from that, where it might take actions. And if you're allowing it to take actions, right, it might take ones that you didn't anticipate, that weren't easy for you to anticipate, right? So really looking into what sort of agency you're giving it and what the implications of it being a little bit more unpredictable there may be, right? So yeah, those, again, like I said, these are not exhaustive, but I think that can hopefully start to get you to think about the different areas. And like I said, I certainly would point you to, a couple of those other frameworks out there to take a look at.
Yeah, and I think threat modeling is a good way for you to prioritize those security dollars to help you understand where should I be spending the money and what should I be securing. So one of the companies that I work with really put this into practice and saw great success. So they are a large human resources company, and they have a human resources application, and they wanted to have Gen AI, like a chatbot kind of thing, integrated into that. And their customers and regulators were concerned that somebody could ask Gen AI questions that could result in PII leakage, especially given that it's human resources, right? And so they realize that, like the use cases that they're planning to deploy to production in the next 6 months, PII leakage was the thing that they needed to solve for. And they worked with us and we helped them threat model those, and we immediately figured out, okay, these are the controls and these are the tools that you need. So you need Cloud DLP to tokenize your inputs, you need to sanitize your inputs, and then create a preamble so that it doesn't give you, no malicious user can give a malicious prompt. And then when the output's coming out, use Cloud DLP again to inspect it, and boom, right? We did the threat modeling and we solved the problems and the concerns that they had to their customers and their regulators. So having a good threat modeling strategy in place is always key. So we've talked about, having good threat modeling. So what should we know next? And this quote from Sun Tzu's Art of War is really, resonates there, right? You know yourself, that's your threat modeling. Now you need to know your enemy to be never defeated. And that is where we have to start using Gen AI to defend against Gen AI. So there are 3 main issues in the security space that we see in the market, right? The pace at which security threats are growing is just insane. Like hackers have begun using Gen AI to mutate code. They're using for more advanced phishing attacks. They create new attacks all the time. The time to reaction, though, right? The amount of toil and manual effort it takes to search through millions and billions of logs and finding indicators of compromise is getting very slow, and it's not at all effective. And finally, just not enough people. Like there's not enough talent. And even if there is talent, there isn't enough expertise within that talent to really defend you the way you really need to be defended. And that's why companies need to get smarter in defending, right? Security, as I've said, always runs on a tight budget. So we need to make the lives of SOC analysts and threat hunters a lot easier by allowing them to focus on what's really important and automating the time-consuming menial tasks with Gen AI. So, with Gen AI powered SecOps, so think like Chronicle, you can do just that, right? So imagine, your analysts have AI-driven summaries of alerts and events that help you triage that much faster, right? Imagine these summaries coming with next steps that are in those summaries and show you how to respond and even help you automate that response. And imagine if that AI now helped you write incident reports. Imagine if as a threat hunter, you could use a natural language queries instead of learning regex or some complicated language. You could just ask it, show me suspicious Windows events in the past 3 days, and you would get a very refined answer. So this is a game changer for SecOps, and you should definitely have a strategy to transform your SecOps with Gen AI. The customers I work with on transforming SecOps are already seeing places where their resources can be used more effectively, a way for them to consume even more logs, because the AI does a lot of the grunt work. And that is just resulting in better security, less risk, cost savings, time savings, and just their employees are much happier. So we've gone through a lot. So let's summarize, right? Having a security strategy that aligns to your business and your business's vision and goals ensures long-term sustainable success, right? Having governance helps you provide structure around that innovation and prepares you for regulations and for you to be very risk aware. And choosing the right kind of platform ensures that it is ready for your use cases and whatever comes up in the future. And that's the surest way for you to succeed. And you need to embrace innovation from the bottom up. So you're not only inclusive, but also you know what use cases you need to secure, and you can avoid shadow IT problems. And once you have your use cases, you need to perform threat modeling to know exactly where you need to spend your security dollars and resources. And finally, you need to fight fire with fire. Use Gen AI to defend against Gen AI to make your security stronger, faster, and more resource effective. John, do you want to go to the resource available?
Yeah, sure. Happy to talk about this. So what's next? We'll get to Q&A in a minute, but real quick, start your journey today, right? Talk to your sales rep. If you're not already engaged with them, they're there to help. They will guide you through, right, this journey. Perhaps if you need that, deep engineering, architectural expertise, working with you through consulting, right? Look at our professional services there. Go to consulting, see how we can help you. You're here today, so hopefully you are a member of the community. So thank you. If you're not, join, learn, get engaged. We really appreciate it. And feedback, they say, right? Feedback is a gift. So please, please give us that gift, give us the feedback, and ideas for future sessions, right? We obviously hope you've learned stuff today. And like I said, we'll get to the Q&A in a minute, but if you've got ideas, please let us know. We've got upcoming events, right? So definitely look at those, learn. We've got amazing team members who put in work to hopefully, again, share with you about these really interesting topics. So take a look at what's coming up and join other sessions as well.
Amazing. Thank you both so much for this information, the conversation. In particular, I loved all of the real stories that you were able to tell from customers and users who are along this journey. We're all in this together and figuring it out and what's best for our business. So really appreciated all the insights that you shared. And with the remaining time that we have, we are going to go through some of the questions that we've received, as well as cover those that are in the chat. So now's your chance. Please, if you have any additional questions, please add those into the chat and we'll be sure to get to them. And as a little reminder, all of these resources that you see here on this slide are listed in the YouTube description, so you can access them quickly from there. Okay, let's dive into the questions. So one of the first ones that we've received is around a framework. Is there a framework that standardizes how data is treated and protected in the world of AI?
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. I can take this one. First of all, thank you. It's a great question. I would say from the protected, that's where I believe some of the frameworks or what I talked about earlier when we were going through the threat modeling are certainly applicable. So the NIST, OWASP Top 10, MITRE Atlas, those definitely, when you think of like, hey, what are the threats, that I need to be addressing, that'll definitely highlight some of those areas. As far as treated, that's an interesting one. I think the Google Cloud Responsible AI Practices really kind of touches on that. In my opinion, that's an area you can look at like, hey, how is the data treated? What's being done? And then, of course, you've got and I think, Anna, you mentioned that earlier, the Google SAFE framework, that's the secure AI framework. And so we've got those links, we'll share them there. So yeah, great question, yeah.
John, if you don't mind, I see two questions on the comments that relate to framework. So we'll just cover them if you're okay with that, Lauren and John. There's one from Gagandeep that asks, are security frameworks in progress? Like there is NIST cybersecurity framework. Is AI going to be integrated or a new framework for security would come up? So just because we mentioned NIST, NIST does have a specific risk framework, and I'll paste that in the comments. This is a public-facing link. But just in general, right? When we talk about SAFE, when we talk about all these frameworks that exist, they are created in collaboration with entities like NIST. So a lot of times, if you implement everything that is there within one framework, you're going to see a large overlap, or you're going to be compliant to another framework too. So for example, SAFE, which is Secure AI Framework from Google Cloud, is built in sort of like collaboration with industry people and NIST and standards, people who set standards and everything. So you will see a lot of overlap, and it could be a way for you to just implement cybersecurity framework like the NIST cybersecurity or the AI risk framework within the GCP platform. So it could be, that would be general, this would be a specific thing to your platform. And I hope that answers your question, Karan.
Amazing. Thank you. And thank you for your questions. Okay, moving along. How do I measure the bias of data being sent as a response from LLMs?
So this is a question that we get all the time because people are worried about bias with LLMs. And there are multiple ways in which you can measure the bias. I'll just cover some of them at a high level, given the time constraints. So first, before a company like Google releases its model, it is doing an insane amount of tests for bias, right? The DeepMind team, the responsible AI team, they do a lot of tests. So you're getting that initial lot of testing done already. So by the time the LLM hits GA, it's already been tested. So it shouldn't have that much of bias. But then again, we also give you tools like the safety attributes API and the recitation checks API, right? Your safety attributes API is giving you a score against specific types of bias, right, in the response. Your recitation checks API and your grounding that John talked about in his slide is ensuring that you can actually identify the sources that are coded in the response. So you know if there is a potential bias, which source it's coming from. And the third thing I'll mention is that please take a look at Google's responsible AI practices that are published and publicly available. They talk about things like how you can do testing with a diverse group of testers who adversarially test the system. Also, making sure you have the right kind of metrics to see how LLM or how your product performs across different subgroups. So there's a lot of suggestions that are very specific that you can implement in your testing to not only measure bias, but also mitigate that bias in your response for LLMs.
Makes sense. And the link to the responsible AI details is in the description. All right. So what are the data ownership, security, and compliance aspects to consider when offering an AI ML SaaS, so a software as a service?
Yeah, I'll take this one. Again, great question. And I'll go back to some of a little bit of repeat for me here of it's actually quite similar the way you would, take out the AML for a second, right? How would you think about data ownership, security, and compliance, right, when you're offering a SaaS, right? So what are the questions you would ask of, well, first off, what type of data am I going to be collecting, processing, storing as part of this offering, right? Because that will then help inform you what sort of compliance or regulatory implications there are, right? Or where you are in the world, right? Think, oh, I'm in Europe, I have GDPR, or I'm in the US and I'm doing stuff with health data, so I've got HIPAA to think about, right? There's the type of data that you want to work with is certainly going to have implications, right? So that's one area, but a lot of the others, right? It's going to be very similar, right? So, oh, how am I authenticating users? How am I encrypting data at rest, in transit, right? Those same type of questions you would normally ask are certainly more, just as applicable with an AI ML SaaS, right? I think we talked a bit about earlier of some of the more novel ways that once you start to get into Gen AI, that like, okay, this is a little different. And I certainly would, again, point back to that similar different paper we've got, where there's some areas where it might be a little bit more nuanced, but in general, you're going to approach it very similar, right? You're going to take the same questions you would normally ask, same approach to securing you would normally take out there. So with just a general SaaS offering, right?
Makes good sense. And I think there's a question that came in through the chat that relates to this around comparing regular AI to Gen AI. What are the Gen AI use cases that may be the most complicated or challenging in terms of security and privacy?
Yeah, I could take a first crack. Anirudh, I'll turn it to you too if there's anything else you want to add. Thank you, Dave. That is a really good question. I think, first off, I'll go back to the type of data. So to me, in terms of, more complicated, all that, if you're using, certain types of data that have very strong regulatory requirements around them, that's obviously just like it would today. It adds a certain level of complexity and challenge on top of it to just make sure you're addressing and adhering to those requirements. So I would say certainly the type of data that's involved. And the other, going back to my customer, right, around interaction with the LLM, right? So that's something I've certainly seen of if you're allowing direct user interaction for that. Now you're looking at prompt injection and how do I handle this? How am I evaluating? Anirudh talked earlier about fighting fire with fire. That's where we see customers starting to use, well, I'll use another LLM to evaluate input or output before I even get to my LLM, right? So trying to take advantage of tools like that, and certainly by adding in those additional layers, I think that can add some more challenge or complexity there.
Yeah,
I don't
and
know.
I'll just add that the one thing that I see is more challenging than the rest is um, use cases where humans are directly interacting with your LLM. That's the ones that I would consider have more of a security or privacy challenge. Not because we don't have controls, we do have controls, we do have things we can do, but sometimes users can do something new and unique, and it may not have even have malicious intent. It could just be a user being a user and creating problems. So I think those are the use cases that require more focus. And as always, where the input cannot be sanitized, the output is going to be questionable.
Got it. Makes sense. And I know we are at time. We did just have a couple more questions, so we're going to cover just two more. If you have any additional, please drop them into the chat and use the Google Cloud community, where our team and your peers will be monitoring there and happy to help you out. So thank you for sticking with us. We'll just cover two more questions. So our next one is, how do I validate that Google is not using clients' data on training LLMs?
Oh yeah, this is a question we get all the time, Lauren. I mean, so there's multiple ways, right? The first thing, we've talked about the difference between the consumer versus enterprise level tools, right? So that's the first thing we need to understand, because the terms of service for each one of those is different. And the reason why this is important is because the terms of service is an agreement between you and Google. So this is the first place that you can establish what Google can or cannot do with your data, or will or won't do with your data, right? So that's where it makes it very clear in the terms of service for Vertex AI that your data is your own. You have complete control over it. We don't train on it. Second, think about the architecture we talked about. The hardware that the LLM is hosted on, that common Google infrastructure, is like a read-only memory. It's like a ROM, right? It is physically incapable of storing and training on your data. So that's another control that you have. Next is some of those locks that we talked about, like customer managed encryption keys, the ability to have your data stored anywhere you like. So these are giving you extra controls, because Google's policy is your data is your own all the time. You own your data all the time. And these controls help you maintain that independence and have complete control over your data at all times. And then finally, one thing that I can also think of is access transparency logs. Anytime Google kind of touches your infrastructure or has to touch your project, access transparency logs will help you understand who's doing what and why, and give you the ability to kind of prevent them from doing things. So definitely that's another control that you have. And there's so many more, like if we can definitely do a deep dive, use one of the links to contact us, and we can go deeper into these questions if you'd like.
Perfect. And I think that's a good segue as well into some of the services that we have touched on today, or that we offer. So with that said, how does the approach to security differ across services? And then as a follow-on to that, are there Google Cloud solutions that you recommend that use AI or Gen AI to help improve or automate security and compliance for our business? So a bit of a two-part there is, how does the approach to security differ across services? And then what are those solutions that Google Cloud offers to help with that?
Yeah, of course. And I'm going to make it a three-parter, because there's a question by Abrar Khan that says, how can we secure cloud SIEM? Suggest something, and it will cover that too, right? So here's the thing. Google really differentiates itself in the security space, right? There are some very unique controls that you won't find anywhere else in other platforms. So VPCSC is a key one, right? API level firewalling. I'm not aware of another platform that has a single tool that's going to give you that level of API control, and also enforce identity and context-aware access to your Gen AI projects and services, right? And then we had a question on Cohere. Cohere runs on Google Cloud. So not only its TPUs, but the reason why they probably chose Google is because of its security differentiators. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, when it comes to questions on, okay, how does this differentiate against Microsoft Security Copilot, and how do you secure a cloud SIEM? That's where we need to think about the security workbench product that Google has announced, right? It is meant to be a differentiator, and it's also a way for you to improve and automate the security and compliance in your business, right? One unique thing is part of that workbench is the announcement of SecPalm, which is a security-focused LLM, right? Google acquired Mandiant a couple of years ago. And so we have not only Google's intelligence data, but one of the best companies in the world, Mandiant's intelligence and security data. And we have those analysts looking at that data and training that LLM. So that SecPalm is meant for security and security only. Now, the differentiator here is it's not GA yet, it's in preview, but that SecPalm is made available to you as an API through Model Garden. So not only can you consume it through Chronicle or Mandiant tools, you can also consume it directly as an API. So to Abrar's question and some of the other questions on how do you automate or improve, you can use SecPalm or some of our first-party tools to kind of improve and automate the security process within your company, because SecPalm is meant for security use cases and has a lot of intelligence around that.
Makes good sense. And we did just drop a link into the chat as well that provides an overview and additional links to those solutions that you just covered. So please do check that out. And we are at time. So I just wanted to say thank you again so much for your time, for your information, and everything that you've shared with us today, and for everyone for joining us. As a final takeaway, here are those resources, and we'd love to hear from you in the feedback form if you have any suggestions for future topics or what you thought about how our session went today and what we covered. So thank you so much. John, Anirudh, any final thoughts, recommendations before we close out today?
Thank you for the time.
Thank you for the time. Feel free to contact us. We're happy to dive deeper into any topics. If you want to deep dive on any of the topics we've covered in the same Google channel, let us know, and we'll be happy to have a session on that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone. And we hope you have a great rest of your day, evening, or wherever you are in the world. Thank you again. Hope you have a good one.